What feels sudden now wasn't sudden at all. Is the world glitching, or is it just me? Glitched. Wait, are we glitched? Feels like we're glitching. Glitched. A new Sassy Politics series. With me, Christy Chanelle. 1973. 3 founders. 1 mission. Washington, D.C. in the 1970s left its mark on everything it touched. Briefing folders worn thin from being opened and closed too many times. Conference tables scarred by coffee rings and pencil grooves. Memos moved fast. Read once, passed along before anyone else could be responsible. That was the world Paul Weyrich had grown into. The same young man who once believed a campaign could change the country. That belief cracked with Goldwater's loss. Not just the defeat itself, but what it revealed. The elections weren't the only visible part. That power didn't disappear when votes were counted. It moved into offices without windows, into hands no one ever elected. The candidates were out front. The control stayed behind the scenes. What stayed with Weyrich wasn't the loss. It was the aftermath. Power diluted in closed rooms. Decisions reshaped by people who were never on the ballot. Promises narrowed until voters were left holding something unrecognizable. It was present, but powerless. By the early 70s, Weyrich had stopped treating elections as the main point. He was watching what followed, how authority slipped away once governing began. The failure wasn't random. It was repeated. And repetition has a way of pulling certain figures into view. Edwin Follner. At 32, Edwin Follner wasn't building a public profile or chasing donors. He already had a seat inside the system, working in policy environments where ideas were evaluated quietly and consequences mattered. He cut his teeth at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, an institution built around endurance. Ideas were tested there for how long they could hold their shape once exposed to government pressure and time. Some survived, but most didn't. By the early 70s, Washington was small enough that people wrestling with the same problem kept crossing paths. Policy briefings, closed-door strategy sessions, post-Goldwater autopsies. The question wasn't how to win the elections. It was who actually held power once a politician was voted in, focused on permanence, how ideas were documented, how policy survived handoffs, how influence stayed intact after campaigns ended. Same moment, same frustration, different instincts. And by 1973, asking the question was no longer enough. That was the year the answer took shape. Money. Weyrich and Follner had the ideas. They had the framework. They had the institutional instinct. What they didn't have was money. Think tanks don't survive on vision alone. They survive on backing that doesn't flinch when ideas get uncomfortable. Funding that doesn't disappear when attention fades. That's when Joseph Coors enters. Not just with money, but with experience. A corporate patriarch shaped by decades of Cold War fear and business logic. Coors wasn't theorizing about power. He had already lived inside it. He understood how influence worked when no one was watching, how systems protected themselves, how control was maintained long after leadership changed. Coors didn't fund causes to be liked. He funded them to make sure certain outcomes never became possible. By the time Weyrich approached him, the problem didn't need explaining. Coors recognized it immediately. In business, you don't pour resources into something that can be dismantled every 4 years. You build what lasts beyond leadership changes. Coors didn't ask for a spotlight. He didn't want one. He wasn't interested in a platform. He believed in permanence. And with his backing, the idea stopped being theoretical. It became viable. It needed a name, something neutral, respectable, something that sounded like scholarship, not strategy. The Heritage Foundation. On paper, it would look harmless. Research, policy analysis, conservative thought leadership. A place politicians could cite without feeling owned by it. In practice, though, it was something completely different. A governing playbook, a Bible, so to speak, waiting to be opened by whomever held power. The power of the presidency. Presidents would come and go. Administrations would rise, fracture, and fall. But the system would remain. Quietly training staff, standardizing language, preparing policy long before the cameras ever arrived. It didn't require loyalty. It required access. There was no need for a public face, no founding photograph, no ceremonial moment to point back to. The absence was intentional. Each man understood his role. Joseph Coors understood money, how it moves, how it protects itself, how it shapes outcomes without ever appearing in the room. Paul Weyrich understood direction, how to design a movement that could steer power without ever holding office. Edwin Follner understood operations, how to turn ideas into a repeatable process, how to build something that could keep running long after its architects were gone. It was a system strong enough to outlive them, one that is still running more than 50 years later. By the mid-1970s, it had the bones, the shape, the internal logic. What it didn't yet have was the muscle. It didn't have people, because policy alone doesn't move a country. Structure alone doesn't create momentum. That kind of force requires belief, identity, something people will defend with every fiber of their being. And Paul Weyrich knew exactly where that kind of power lived. The machine needed a majority.